Hello and welcome. This is a review of a TFW, traditional Filipino weapons, katana or katana-like object. Please note that I bought this with my own money for realsies, and that TFW had nothing to do with the review. Also, it's based on my opinion, and if you don't like that, then don't listen to it. In fact, it's probably better not to. First up, we'll talk about the blade. To be more specific, we'll talk about just the sharpie metal part of the blade. It's important to note that the blade is relatively lackluster, practical. It lacks zazz, you might say. While the shape is very pleasing, and it is rather sharp, it doesn't have a wavy, sparkly hamon that intrigues your eye with its mystery and art. I also found the blade to have less than crisp lines. While that's not necessarily expected in many production katana, particularly one at this price point, it is worth noting. Initially, it may seem as though I'm dogging on this bee. However, I can assure you I actually like the blade quite a bit. While it is very practical, that is its intent, and I think it serves the blade well. Next, we'll look at the naked blade. The dinger's hanging out. More importantly, you can actually see the nakago or tang of the blade. In many production katana, it's common to see tangs that are not very well formed. This one actually has a very nice shape to it, and I found it very pleasant. In my opinion, however, the Kazaki was a little lackluster. While it serves its purpose and it's quite pointy, it nevertheless lacked zazz or crisp lines or a nice shape. The polish on the blade is also rather dull. Some may like this, but I find it makes a terrible rear view mirror. I did not find that the dull polish impeded cutting in any way. Cutting was more impeded by my poor cutting ability. The sai I have has several pings and dings, but that will help me illustrate its awesomeness to you. First up, the scratches on this matte black finish are relatively easy to fix. You can see here, when I take the Sharpie across the saya, that it almost conceals the scratch. This method is far from perfect. However, it does serve to camouflage some of the scratches and dings. I find that it works reasonably well. I rather like the matte black finish on the saya. I also like that the koiguchi is made out of metal. It has a nice blued steel look to it. All of the fittings, in fact, have this type of color. You can also see where I've colored in the area where the kurikata was missing. Here's the koijiri. My pronunciation of these terms is likely incorrect, and that's because I don't know how to say them. Moving on, you can see this scabbard. It's a Hanwei scabbard, and you can see the fingerprints shown in the light. When I try to mar this one up with my meaty, sweaty palms, you can see that the fingerprints are not shown as easily. The saya is also very stout. You can see here a comparison against some other sayas from different manufacturers. Enough about the scabbard, and on to the other fun stuff. We'll talk about the tsuka a bit, or the handle. It's adorned with the same type of blue metallic-y fittings, very practical and simple in nature. There's also no samegawa on this blade. It has some sort of fake snakeskin looking stuff. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. I found the handle to be very comfortable. It also held tight. The ito didn't loosen up easily while I was cutting. Honestly, I prefer this type of simple, utilitarian kind of view. I find that gaudy fittings on a katana in this price range tend to be tacky or overdone. That is my personal preference, and I understand it may not be yours, but I find them distracting like a sweaty scrotum on a hot summer day. Moving on, the habaki is seemingly well fit. Nothing too special, but you can see when I shake this bastard upside down, it doesn't fall out. That's an important thing to not cutting your dinger off. If anything, the saya is almost a little too tight. While I can still draw it with some degree of ease, it takes more force than you might want to put into it. In this photo, you can see the fittings as they're pulled off the blade. I actually admire the seppa most. I find that many katana have the same type of brass washers, and while these are still brass seppa, they have a little bit more character and they're different. And so that's, I guess, unique or cool, or makes me feel like a special, unique, and beautiful snowflake. In my opinion, everything about the blade seemed very sturdy, right down to the inside of the fuchi. The Suka core developed a rattle after enough hard cutting, but no cracks are present, and it should be easy to fix. It has a meaty presence, and it fits my sausage fingers well. The sword was easy to handle against bottles. Not that they should present a problem anyway. But it didn't exactly make it through all the harder targets. This one in particular gave it some trouble, though it did have a sizable wooden core. It's also a rather thick, wet-rolled bit of newspaper. The blade did develop a slight rattle in the handle after doing the hard target cutting. This, I think, could be fixed with a shim. However, the blade suffered no noticeable damage. Many types of damage can happen after hard target cutting, but I did not sense any bends, nicks, chips, or dings. After doing some heavy cutting, I thought I'd do a sharpness test on some paper. Admittedly, I'm not very good at doing these paper cutting tests, but the blade is performing worse than your average, you might say. This particular test does not show the blade in a very kind light. Please keep in mind that the blade is both second-hand and heavily used. Ultimately, what it comes down to is it worth the money? Currently, they're asking $405 for this blade new. In that price point, there are several options available. Shown here are Ronin, Chinese, Cold Steel, Hanwei, Munetoshi, the TFW blade reviewed, and a Legacy Last Legend blade that's no longer available. This blade was neither the best at cutting, and it was far from the worst. It was not the most beautiful of the blades, but it was also not the ugliest. It was not the most lively of the blades, but it was not the heaviest or clunkiest. Putting it more bluntly, there was nothing about this blade in particular that stood out and made me think, I need to sell my children to buy more of these. What it did do was balance cutting, handling, and appearance reasonably well. I find that the characteristics of the blade fit me personally, and so I'm happy to own one. I understand that assigning any kind of score would be purely subjective, and not really make any sense, but if you twist my arm and make me, I'd give it 3 bananas. No, wait, 1 banana, but 3 stars. Oh yeah. Thanks for watching. I hope it was somewhat helpful, or at least entertaining. Cheers.